You remember Windows phones, right? They were really cool at one point, but eventually they failed. It's not like they were bad. Previous Nokia engineers who worked on those Windows phones say that they had superior software to Android. Then why did they fail? The story is pretty long and there are many reasons, but perhaps the most important one, in my opinion, is the lack of Google Apps support. You see, Microsoft was already late to the party when they launched the first ever Windows phone. iPhones and Android phones had already been popular for a few years since then, and to make matters worse, unlike Android, which was open source and any manufacturer could use it, if you wanted Windows OS, you had to pay Microsoft. So for many companies, it became easy to make Android phones. After a few attempts, Microsoft brought on Nokia to build phones for them, and they did see some reasonable success, like the iconic Lumia 1020 with its 41 megapixel camera. That phone is still extraordinary even today. While their hardware was unquestionably iconic and interesting, the software, like I mentioned, had a lot of drawbacks. In fact, when the Lumia 1020 came out, Google had already officially declared that they will no longer be working to develop apps for Windows Phone 8. So these Windows phones never really had official Google apps, like no Gmail, no YouTube. If you want to access Gmail, you had to go through the browser and access the web version. That's not so bad. But to access any other app like YouTube, for example, you had to install third-party apps. That's not a good experience, right? When there's Android and iOS, why did Google do it? Well, Google and Microsoft aren't really the best of friends. There's a classic rivalry between them. And Google had a much more popular operating system on their portfolio, Android, right? Why would they focus on Microsoft, who have their own search engine, Bing? So they will never let Google be the main player on their phones. So Google decided, you know what, let's make Android really good and we can establish our dominance instead of trying to be a second or third wheel on a Microsoft phone. And they were right, Android phones became much better for Google. But Microsoft, because of their stubbornness to not make the OS free, kind of got left behind due to the lack of ecosystem. They did launch a few nice phones like the Lumia 950, the 950 XL. They even launched a budget phone like the Lumia 650 up until 2016, but Microsoft had enough, so in 2017, Satya Nadella officially killed the project. We did get to see some interesting phones, like even Samsung made some Windows phones, if you remember. I think they called it the Omnia series. And while they boasted iconic, timeless hardware designs, their software was crippled because they didn't understand how important Google Apps are. If anything, the story of Windows Phone's failure shows the power of Google. That's scary, isn't it? One decision from them and your entire platform can be crippled. Google decided to focus on Apple because they don't have their own search engine, but Microsoft do. So it was like a better business decision and they'll get victory over Microsoft, which is their enemy or something. So it was like a win-win for Google. The aftermath is that sadly we lost a cool series of phones which would have been like a third contender in this Android versus iOS market. Oh well, it was good while it lasted. I mean, this is what happens when you're too stubborn and you don't adapt with the times. Were you one of the lucky few who had a chance to use Windows phones back in the day? Let me know.